Welcome to today's session. I am Jemisha, working as assistant professor at Emmanuel Arthur College of Pharmacy. In this session, we will discuss the anatomy of respiratory organs, the physiology of breathing, gas exchange, transport of respiratory gases, and regulation of respiration. Introduction. The respiratory system consists of organs and structures that help in breathing and gas exchange. Its primary role is to maintain adequate oxygen supply and remove excess carbon dioxide from the body. The major function is gas exchange. Oxygen enters the body through inhalation and reaches body tissues through blood circulation. Carbon dioxide produced in tissues is transported back to the lungs and removed during exhalation. Apart from gas exchange, the respiratory system also helps regulate blood pH. Since carbon dioxide affects acidity, controlling carbon dioxide levels help maintain acid-base balance. Another important function is voice production. Sound is produced when air passes through the vocal cords present in the larynx. The respiratory system also contributes to smell sensation due to olfactory receptors in the nasal cavity. It protects the body by filtering dust particles, microorganisms, and harmful substances before they reach the lungs. Next, organization of the respiratory system. The respiratory system is anatomically divided into upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. The upper respiratory tract includes the nose, nasal cavity, and pharynx. These structures mainly prepare inhaled air by filtering, warming, and humidifying it. The lower respiratory tract consists of the larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, and lungs. These structures conduct air and participate in gas exchange. Next, anatomy of nose and nasal cavity. The nose is the first structure of the respiratory system through which air enters the body. It plays an important role in preparing inhaled air before it reaches the lungs. The nose has external and internal parts. Inside the nose, small hairs called nasal hairs trap dust particles and microorganisms, preventing them from entering deeper respiratory structures. The nasal cavity is lined with mucous membranes that help humidify inhaled air. This prevents dryness and irritation in respiratory passages. The rich blood supply in the nasal cavity warms cold air from the environment. Entering from the environment, inside nasal cavity, there are curved structures called turbinates or concave. These structures increase the surface area for better warming, filtration, and humidification. The nose also plays an important role in smell sensation because olfactory receptors present in the nasal cavity detect odors. Therefore, the nose acts as an important protective and conditioning organ for inhaled air. Next, paranasal sinuses. Paranasal sinuses are air-filled cavities present within certain bones of the skull. These cavities are connected to the nasal cavity and help support respiratory function. There are four main types of sinuses: frontal sinus, maxillary sinus, ethmoid sinus, and sphenoid sinus. One important function of these sinuses is reducing skull weight. If these spaces were completely filled with bone, the skull would become much heavier. Sinuses also contribute to voice resonance, helping improve sound quality during speech. Another function is mucus protection. The mucus produced by sinuses help trap dust particles and microorganisms. Inflammation of sinus is called sinusitis. Patients with sinusitis may experience headache, facial pain, fever, and nasal blockage. Although small in structure, paranasal sinuses perform important supportive function in respiration and speech. Next, pharynx. The pharynx is a muscular tube that serves as a common passageway for both air and food. It extends from the nasal cavity to the larynx and esophagus. Since both respiratory and digestive system pass through this region, the pharynx plays an important role in breathing as well as swallowing. The pharynx is divided into three parts. The first part is nasopharynx, which is located behind the nasal cavity. It mainly allows the passage of air and contains opening of the auditory tubes that connect to the middle ear. The second part is the oropharynx, located behind the oral cavity. It acts as a passage for both food and air. The third part is the laryngopharynx, which is the lower portion of the pharynx. From this region, air enters the larynx while food enters the esophagus. Another important feature of the pharynx is the presence of tonsils. Tonsils act as a defense mechanism and help protect the body from infections by trapping harmful microorganisms. Thus, the pharynx plays a role in respiration, digestion, and immunity. Next, larynx. The larynx is a cartilaginous organ located between the pharynx and trachea. It is commonly called the voice box because it plays a major role in sound production. The larynx consists of several cartilages, among with the thyroid cartilage is the largest. In males, it is commonly visible externally as the Adam's apple. Another important cartilage is the stricoid cartilage, which provides structural support to the airway. Inside the larynx are the vocal cords, also called vocal folds. When air passes through these cords, vibrations are produced, resulting in speech and voice formation. An important structure present here is the epiglottis. During swallowing, the epiglottis closes the opening of the airway and prevents food from entering the respiratory tract. If food accidentally enters the airway, coughing occurs as a protective reflex. Therefore, the larynx functions in air passage, voice production, and airway protection. Next, trachea. The trachea, commonly called the windpipe, is a tube-like structure that extends from the larynx to the bronchi. It is approximately 10 to 12 centimeters long and is supported by C-shaped cartilaginous rings. These rings help maintain airway patency and prevent collapse during breathing. The rings are incomplete posteriorly, allowing the esophagus behind the trachea to expand when food passes through it. The inner lining of the trachea contains mucus and tiny hair-like structures called cilia. Mucus trap dust particles, bacteria, and other harmful substances. The cilia beat continuously in an upward direction to remove trapped particles from the respiratory tract. This mechanism is known as the mucociliary escalator. At its lower end, the trachea divides into right and left bronchi, which conduct air into the lungs. Thus, the trachea serves both respiratory and protective functions. Next, bronchi. At the lower end of the trachea, it divides into two main branches called the right and left pulmonary bronchi, primary bronchi. These bronchi carry air into the lungs. The right bronchus is wider, shorter, and more vertical compared to the left bronchus. Because of this, inhaled foreign bodies are more likely to enter the right bronchus. The left bronchus is narrower and slightly longer because of the position of the heart. Once inside the lungs, the bronchi continue dividing into small branches called secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, and eventually into bronchioles. This repeated branching resembles the branches of a tree and is therefore called the bronchial tree. The bronchial tree helps distribute air evenly to all regions of the lungs, ensuring efficient ventilation and gas exchange. Next, bronchioles. Bronchioles are the smaller branches formed from bronchi. Unlike bronchi, bronchioles do not contain cartilage but have smooth muscle in their walls. These smooth muscles help regulate airflow by controlling the diameter of bronchioles. When bronchioles dilate, more air enters the lungs. When they constrict, airflow decreases. This process is clinically important because in disease conditions like asthma, bronchioles become narrowed due to inflammation and smooth muscle contraction, leading to breathing difficulty. Bronchioles are mainly of two types: terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles belong to the conducting portion and mainly transport air. Respiratory bronchioles belong to the respiratory portion and participate in gas exchange. Respiratory bronchioles eventually open into alveolar ducts and alveoli, where oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange takes place. Thus, bronchiole serves as an important link between conduction and gas exchange. Next, lungs. The lungs are the primary organs of respiration and are located inside the thoracic cavity on either side of the heart. They are soft, spongy, and elastic organs designed specifically for gas exchange. The lungs are protected by the rib cage and covered by a protective membrane called the pleura, which we will discuss in the next slide. The right lung is slightly larger than the left lung and consists of three lobes. The left lung is slightly smaller and contains two lobes. Inside the lungs, the bronchial tree continues branching into smaller bronchioles and finally ends in tiny air sacs called alveoli. The lungs contain millions of alveoli, which provide a large surface area for gas exchange. During inhalation, lungs expand and fill with air, while during exhalation, they return to their normal size. Next, pleura. The lungs are surrounded by a thin double-layered membrane called the pleura. The pleura consists of two layers, the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura. Between these two layers, there is a small space called the pleural cavity, which contains a small amount of fluid known as pleural fluid. This fluid acts as the lubricant and reduces friction during breathing. Since lungs continuously expand and contract, friction would occur if this fluid were absent. Pleural fluid also helps maintain negative pressure inside the chest cavity, which is important for lung expansion. Next, alveoli. Alveoli are microscopic balloon-like air sacs present at the ends of the bronchioles. They are the main sites where gas exchange takes place. Each lung contains millions of alveoli, which together provide a very large surface area for oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. The walls of alveoli are extremely thin and are surrounded by an extensive network of blood capillaries. This arrangement makes diffusion of gases highly efficient. Oxygen from inhaled air moves from alveoli into the blood, while carbon dioxide moves from blood into the alveoli for elimination during exhalation. There are two main types of alveolar cells. Type 1 alveolar cells mainly help in gas exchange. Type 2 alveolar cells produce a substance called surfactant. Surfactant reduces the surface tension inside alveoli and prevents their collapse during breathing. Next, functions of the respiratory system. The respiratory system performs several important functions in maintaining body homeostasis. The primary function is gas exchange. Oxygen enters the body and carbon dioxide is removed continuously. Another important function is the regulation of blood pH. Carbon dioxide affects the acidity of blood. By controlling carbon dioxide levels, the respiratory system helps maintain normal acid-base balance. The respiratory system also contributes to voice production. Air passing through the vocal cords produces sound, allowing communication. Another function is olfaction or smell sensation, which occurs due to olfactory receptors in the nasal cavity. The respiratory system also provides protection. Nasal hairs, mucus, and cilia help filter harmful particles, bacteria, and pollutants before they enter the lungs. Next, physiology of respiration. Physiology of respiration refers to the processes involved in breathing and gas exchange. Respiration occurs in several stages. The first stage is pulmonary ventilation, which refers to the movement of air into and out of the lungs. The second stage is external respiration, where oxygen moves from alveoli into blood and carbon dioxide moves from blood into alveoli. The third stage is transport of respiratory gases through blood circulation. Oxygen is carried from lungs to tissues, while carbon dioxide produced in tissues is transported back to the lungs. The final stage is internal respiration, where oxygen enters body cells and carbon dioxide enters blood. Next, mechanism of breathing. Breathing is the process by which air moves into and out of the lungs. This movement occurs mainly due to pressure changes inside the thoracic cavity. Air always moves from an area of high pressure to low pressure. When pressure inside the lungs becomes lower than atmospheric pressure, air enters the lungs. When lung pressure becomes higher than atmospheric pressure, air moves out. The mechanism of breathing mainly consists of two phases: inspiration, which means inhalation, and expiration, which means exhalation. These pressure changes occur due to expansion and contraction of the thoracic cavity with the help of respiratory muscles. Breathing is usually an involuntary process controlled by the respiratory centers in the brain. However, to some extent, it can also be voluntary controlled, such as when holding the breath for a short period. Next, inhalation. Inhalation or inspiration is the process of taking air into the lungs. It is considered an active process because it requires muscular effort and energy. The most important muscle involved in respiration is the diaphragm. During inhalation, the diaphragm contracts and moves downward, increasing the space within the thoracic cavity. At the same time, external intercostal muscles contract and lift the ribcage upward and outward. As the thoracic cavity expands, lung volume increases and pressure inside the lung decreases. Since atmospheric pressure becomes higher than intrapulmonary pressure, air moves into the lungs. During forceful breathing, such as exercise, accessory muscles like the sternocleidomastoid and scalene muscles also assist in respiration. Next, expiration. Expiration or exhalation is the process of removing air from the lungs. Unlike inspiration, normal expiration is usually a passive process because it mainly occurs due to muscle relaxation. During expiration, the diaphragm relaxes and moves upward to its dome-shaped position. At the same time, external intercostal muscles relax, causing the ribcage to move downward and inward. This decreases thoracic cavity volume and increases pressure inside the lungs. As lung pressure becomes greater than atmospheric pressure, air is pushed out of the lungs. During forceful expiration, such as coughing or heavy exercise, abdominal muscles and internal intercostal muscles assist in expelling more air forcefully. Next, respiratory muscles. Respiratory muscles are responsible for the mechanical process of breathing. The most important muscle is the diaphragm, which contributes significantly to normal breathing. When the diaphragm contracts, the thoracic cavity expands, allowing inspiration. The second important group includes the intercostal muscles, which are located between the ribs. There are two main types of intercostal muscles. The external intercostal muscles help during inspiration by lifting the ribcage. The internal intercostal muscles mainly participate during forceful expiration. Certain accessory muscles assist breathing during increased respiratory demand, which includes sternocleidomastoid muscles, scalene muscles, abdominal muscles. These muscles become active during strenuous activity or respiratory distress. Next, pulmonary respiration, pulmonary ventilation. Pulmonary ventilation refers to the movement of air into and out of the lungs. The normal respiratory rate in adult is approximately 12 to 20 breaths per minute. Different lung volumes help us understand different respiratory function. The first is tidal volume, which refers to the amount of air inhaled or exhaled during normal breathing. It is approximately 500 milliliters in adults. The second is inspiratory reserve volume, which is the additional amount of air that can be inhaled after normal inspiration. The third is expiratory reserve volume, which refers to the extra amount of air that can be exhaled forcefully after normal expiration. Another important volume is residual volume, which is the air remaining in the lungs after forceful expiration. Residual volume prevents complete collapse of lungs and helps maintain continuous gas exchange. Measurement of these lung volumes is important in assessing respiratory diseases and lung function. Next, lung volumes. Lung capacities. Lung capacities are measurements formed by combining different lung volumes. These values help assess the overall efficiency and functional status of the lungs. One important capacity is vital capacity, which refers to the maximum amount of air that can be exhaled after taking the deepest possible breath. Vital capacity is calculated by adding tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, and expiratory reserve volume. Another important capacity is total lung capacity, which refers to the maximum amount of air the lungs can hold after complete inspiration. The functional residual capacity refers to the amount of air remaining in lungs after normal expiration. Similarly, inspiratory capacity is the maximum amount of air that can be inhaled after normal expiration. These lung capacities are clinically important because abnormalities may indicate respiratory diseases. Next, gas exchange in lungs. Gas exchange is the primary function of the respiratory system and mainly occurs in the alveoli. Alveoli are surrounded by numerous blood capillaries, forming a large surface area for gas exchange. Gas exchange occurs across a thin structure called the respiratory membrane. This exchange happens through simple diffusion, where gases move from higher concentration to lower concentration. Oxygen concentration is higher inside alveoli and lower in blood arriving from tissues. Therefore, oxygen diffuses from alveoli into the bloodstream. Uh, Carbon dioxide concentration is higher in blood and lower inside alveoli. Therefore, carbon dioxide diffuses from blood into the alveoli to be expelled during exhalation. Efficient gas exchange depends on several factors, including thin alveolar membrane, adequate blood supply, proper ventilation, large surface area of alveoli. Next, transport of oxygen. Once oxygen enters the blood from alveoli, it must be transported to body tissues. Most oxygen transport occurs through hemoglobin, which is present inside red blood cells. Approximately 98% of oxygen is transported bound to hemoglobin as oxyhemoglobin. Only a very small amount, about 2%, remains dissolved directly in plasma. Hemoglobin plays an essential role because oxygen dissolved in plasma alone is not sufficient to meet the body requirements. When blood reaches tissues requiring oxygen, oxyhemoglobin releases oxygen into cells. Several factors influence oxygen release, including temperature, carbon dioxide concentration, and blood pH. Next, transport of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide produced during metabolism must be transported from tissues back to lungs for elimination. Carbon dioxide is transported into three different forms. The majority, around 70%, is transported as bicarbonate in plasma. Inside red blood cells, carbon dioxide combines with water to form carbonic acid, which later dissociates into bicarbonate ions. Approximately 23% of carbon dioxide is transported attached to hemoglobin in the form of carbaminohemoglobin. The remaining 7% is transported dissolved directly in plasma. Next, regulation of respiration. Respiration is regulated automatically by specialized centers in the brain. The respiratory centers are mainly located in the medulla oblongata and pons of the brainstem. The medullary respiratory center controls the basic rhythm of the breathing and continuously sends signal to respiratory muscles. The pons modifies breathing patterns and helps regulate the rate and depth of respiration. Respiration is continuously adjusted according to the body's oxygen demand and carbon dioxide production. For example, during exercise, increased carbon dioxide production stimulates faster breathing. The brain receives information from receptors that monitor oxygen, carbon dioxide, and blood pH levels and adjusts respiration accordingly. Thus, respiration regulation ensures continuous oxygen supply and efficient removal of carbon dioxide accordingly to body needs. Neural regulation of respiration. Neural regulation of respiration refers to the control of breathing by the nervous system. Breathing is regulated mainly by respiratory centers present in the medulla oblongata and pons of the brainstem. The medullary respiratory center is responsible for generating the normal rhythm of breathing. It continuously sends impulses to respiratory muscles such as the diaphragm and intercostal muscles. Within the medulla, there are inspiratory and expiratory centers that coordinate inhalation and exhalation. The pneumothoracic center, located in the pons, regulates the rate and pattern of breathing by limiting excessive inspiration. Another center, called the apneustic center, helps stimulate inspiration and influences breathing depth. In addition to brain centers, receptors present in the lungs also participate in respiratory regulation. Stretched receptors in the lungs prevent excessive expansion. When lungs become overstretched, signals are sent to stop inspiration. This protective mechanism is called the Herring-Brewer reflex. Next, chemical regulation of respiration. Respiration is also regulated chemically through structures called chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors monitor changes in oxygen levels, carbon dioxide levels, and blood pH. The most important factor regulating respiration is carbon dioxide concentration. When carbon dioxide levels increase, blood becomes more acidic. In response, the respiratory centers increase the rate and depth of breathing to eliminate excess carbon dioxide. There are two main types of chemoreceptors. The first are central chemoreceptor located near the medulla. These receptors mainly respond to increased carbon dioxide concentration. The second are peripheral chemoreceptors present in the carotid bodies and aortic bodies. These receptors mainly respond to decreased oxygen levels and changes in pH. Next, common respiratory disorders. Asthma, which means inflammation causing airway narrowing. COPD, which is a chronic airflow obstruction. Pneumonia, infection of the lung tissue. And tuberculosis, bacterial infection that affecting the lungs. Understanding these disorders is important because early diagnosis and treatment improve respiratory health. The respiratory system is essential for maintaining life by ensuring continuous oxygen supply and removal of carbon dioxide. It consists of several organs working together, beginning from the nose and ending in alveoli where gas exchange occurs. The respiratory system performs important functions such as gas exchange, regulation of blood pH, voice protection, smell sensation, and protection against harmful particles. The physiology of respiration includes pulmonary ventilation, gas exchange, transport of gases, and regulation through neural and chemical mechanisms. Proper functioning of the respiratory system is necessary for maintaining blood body hemostasis and cellular metabolism. Any disturbances in respiratory function can significantly affect health, highlighting the importance of understanding respiratory anatomy and physiology. Thank you.